Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining us tonight. In a few minutes, you'll be meeting our new Carolyn Muzzy Director for the Colby College Museum of Art, Jacqueline Terrassa. My name is Julia Lowe, and I'll be your moderator tonight. I'm a member of the Board of Governors for the Colby College Museum of Art, and I also work for a private nonprofit foundation in New York City called the Vilcek Foundation, where I work on annual award prizes given to immigrant artists and scientists who are living and working and contributing to the US. But tonight, I want to most rep being a Colby alum. I'm class of 2014, and I know there are a ton of Colby alum and parents, faculty, staff, current students, Mainers, and I think just arts appreciators in general who want to know what is going on in Waterville with the arts. You all are joining us live from 35 states and 6 countries, and there are hundreds of you here. So shout out to the Colby-wide community for coming together in the middle of a pandemic for the museum. Right now, I'm in my apartment in New York City, and I'm joining this conversation from ancestral lands of the Lenape people in Manhattan. I recognize with gratitude the original stewards of this land. New York City has the largest urban native population in the US, and we extend respect to the Lenape's past and present elders, as well as the community's future generations. So when I was a Colby student, I was an English major. The Colby Museum was truly my safe space on campus. It was where I would go to get away from the noise, de-stress from finals, and just center myself, during those formative and challenging years being a college student. I would enter the galleries, find myself standing in front of a work, and just feel. So I shared that story with you all because it's really my personal honor to introduce to all of you Jacqueline Terrassa. Jackie comes to the Colby Museum with decades of experience. She is an arts educator. She's a community builder. Her career spans working at the Metropolitan Museum of Art here in New York City, the Freer Sackler Gallery at the Smithsonian in DC, and most recently, she was the Women's Board Vice President for Learning and Public Engagement at the Art Institute of Chicago. Jackie and her team brought a highly participatory and imaginative approach to museum education. At the Art Institute, she and her staff strengthened connections between the museum and its neighboring communities across the city of Chicago. But she's now officially a new Mainer, and since arriving last October, Jackie has really brought a new energy to the Colby Museum and to the London Institute for American Art. She is focused on centering Colby's educational mission and really all that the museum does, while connecting with the broader Maine community and while advancing the museum's research and contributions to the arts field worldwide. So she is now really busy working with staff and partners to shape the museum's galleries, as well as Colby's new state-of-the-art art spaces and incubators coming soon to downtown Waterville. You might have questions during the conversation, and you can type in those questions in the chat box at any time. We'll try to get to those at the end. And finally, thank you, Friends of Art. I know a lot of you are here tonight. Friends of Art is a group that supports the continued vitality of the Colby Museum, helping the museum connect more people with art. This evening is made possible in part by the generosity of Friends of Art. So all of you Friends of Art folks watching, hearing this, thank you so much. And I'm proud to be among you too. Okay, so let's now please welcome the Colby Museum's new Carolyn Muzzy Director, Jacqueline Terrassa.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you, Julia, for that fantastic introduction. It is such a pleasure to join you in conversation. All of you who are across the nation and in other countries that have joined us as well. And I also want to acknowledge that I speak from ancestral lands, and I'm quite humbled as a new Mainer, so to speak, although very new Mainer, to know that these lands have been stewarded for thousands of years. The Abenaki, the Maliseet, the Mi'kmaq, the Penobscot, and the Passamaquoddy continue to contribute to the vitality of our region. And I want to acknowledge this in terms of our commitment at Colby to really repair and seek to address the violence and the inequities that we all continue to pay the price of. So with that, it's just such a pleasure to join us here.
Likewise, and Jackie, thank you for that acknowledgement. Let's jump right in, because you have such an interesting career path that has brought you to this new leadership role with the Colby Museum, you know, being that you are an arts educator and you're also an artist. Can you talk a little bit more about your background, you know, your personal background, and how these sides of you are influencing your approach at Colby?
Thank you for asking that question. My first identity in some ways was as an artist, in the sense, although I didn't have those words as a very young person, I was always making art. And I knew that in my future, there would be something having to do with art. I knew I wanted to go and study art in college. What it meant to be an artist, it was something I was sort of learning through, watching people, the mother of a friend of mine who was an artist, kind of what that looked like, but it wasn't necessarily an aspiration to become an artist. I didn't know what I was going to do with it, is my point. And I think that what happened in college was that I started having opportunities not only to create art much more seriously and in a much more committed way, and to learn and really pay attention to how other artists made things, which remains hugely important to me as a leader of a museum, but to also begin to teach. And I just love the process of helping people kind of figure out their own forms of expression, find their language in terms of kind of really connecting with works of art that existed that were made by other people. And really, for me, art is a process of making sense of ourselves and our world. And so all of that comes together in my current work. I think about that a lot, like how, if I had been trained differently, if I had been trained as an art historian, if I had been trained as a formal, art administrator, I really learned by doing, and it was sort of drawing from these experiences of teaching and of making that I developed my leadership approach. And that what that looks like for me is that I see, for instance, the process of creating vision for, say, the Colby College Museum of Art as one of paying attention, really listening and observing and gathering kind of various kinds of input, sensory input, social input, interpersonal input, historical, about the history of this place, and then with others kind of forming the vision of what that should be for the future. So it's really a creative process for me. And it requires also a lot of kind of iteration of kind of imagining what it could be, checking it against what it has been and whether that feels authentic. So it's very much a creative process. I think the educator piece, where it's really central, is that I always think about who is our audience, and not just our audience, but who are the people who are benefiting from what we're doing. Communities of people, individuals who benefit. And so always kind of thinking about that learning piece. How are we helping people grow in what they want to do? I'm not interested in telling people what they need to learn about art. I'm interested in helping people come to see the value of art for themselves.
Now, and I'm like hearing how creativity is kind of just such an important part of any leadership role process. And I can't help but think about, the current state of what life now with this pandemic, it has changed so much, and it has challenged, I think, all arts institutions, all cultural institutions to think differently and to be more creative, and to think beyond the walls of their physical spaces. So I'm curious to hear, how has the Colby Museum pivoted during this time?
Yes, and I have to say, I've been so impressed by what happened before I got here, because I got here several months after the pandemic was really had really started. And so looking at what the team had done in those first months, definitely it strikes me how there was this, first of all, commitment that the world was changing, and that was critical to be responsive to what was changing in the world. And at the same time, and by world, I mean as close to home as, down the street. But that at the same time, it was crucial that we kept fulfilling our mission. That the question of, are we going to fulfill our mission during this time of crisis that we have no idea how long it's going to last, wasn't a question. So the team very quickly worked with others. So the work was amongst the team, but it was also very much in collaboration and conversation with others in our community to really understand, like, okay, given the conditions and how they're changing, what is possible to do? So as an example, we couldn't have school tours for children, and we couldn't have family programs. So, but children continue to need more than ever. They need art now. So we joined others in our community, led by Waterville Creates and others, in the process of devising this program of distributing art kits across our community. And that program really has grown. And we were just talking today how it's at a point of inflection, in the sense of, we've seen the impact of that program, the reach has had, the opportunities. We have different and new partners that are ensuring that these art kits are getting into the hands of kids that have the least resources, and kind of what's the potential for this program now that we've learned what we've learned. So we're beginning to sort of ask questions about, where does this take us in the future? The same with our public programs, for instance. We were doing public programs in the galleries. So our staff nimbly tried to start experimenting with, what does that program look like online? And we discovered things. We discovered that when we do our Let Art Inspire series, for instance, and disseminate it through videos and Facebook, we have a really huge draw that isn't possible when you have, activities in a gallery. So there are some things that are possible in the online space that are not possible in person. And then certainly with our faculty and students, I mean, it's been so incredible to see how everybody has quickly adapted to really hybrid learning and learn new tools for teaching and learning. And we've figured out ways in which we can continue to have some in-person visits, but that look very different than they did before, and certainly kind of dedicating more resources to reaching out, providing images to faculty so that they can incorporate those into classes, and sustaining that kind of outreach that we had before in terms of the curricular integration that is so central to what we do. So those are just some examples. And I think for me, the key thing is now, it's like, what are we learning that we're learning will need to continue? Not need to continue, but that we just see a huge opportunity to continue because of what is possible. How are we changing? Because it's not about returning to some way in which we were before. Some things we will return to when we can, but we're also creating new possibilities.
Yeah, no, it's so nice to hear you speak about it, because I feel like I'm hearing like your approach and your kind of like your internal principles about, this process. What do you see as your guiding principles for the near future at Colby, but also the coming years at the museum?
Thank you for that. Yeah, and it's interesting, because I would say a principle of my personal practice, and I think that is something also that I see here and among my staff, my colleagues, is a reflective practice, of how do we learn from what we're doing? How can we make it stronger, more impactful? What is making a difference? What is not? Where do we put our efforts? What do we learn from others? So reflective practice is a really fundamental piece. I think at the core of everything we do here at the Colby Museum is our mission. So we are a teaching museum. Everything we do branches out from our understanding that we are contributing in some way and important ways to the education of young people. Starting certainly with students at Colby, it doesn't stop there. There are others that also benefit from our educational mission, But if we fail students of Colby, then we're not doing our job. So students of Colby are enmeshed throughout everything we do at the museum. Certainly they're coming as part of classes. They're participating in sort of co-curricular programs, but they're also helping us with data in our collections database. They are helping us conceive programs. They're packing those art kits. They are doing research, for upcoming projects. They are collaborating with major artists that we're bringing through the Lunder Institute and other researchers. So students at Colby are really part of everything we do. So that's another really key component. I think a third component that I think is really crucial centers on our emphasis on American art. I mean, we have a wide-ranging collection, but certainly we've focused on American art since from the beginning. And there, what I would say is that our approach to American art is one of kind of constantly expanding, unsettling it, interrogating the question of what is American art? Where are the boundaries of American art? What boundaries are valid? What boundaries we need to let go of? What actually counts? What do we value as a nation? What reflects our values as we change as well? So I think that's a critical component. And then finally, I would say that another thing that I've been thinking about a lot, because we're growing, as you mentioned in your introduction, we're going to have downtown spaces. We have the Lunder Institute. We have the digital space. Is that at the core of all of it, artistic practice, so the making of art by artists we engage with, research that happens here at Colby and in the museum in particular, the teaching and learning piece, the community engagement piece, these are all interconnected. They're not parallel to each other. They're actually interconnected to each other. And in fact, if we're going to have new ideas about what American art is or what art is in general, what art can be in our world, we need to constantly bring them together. And I think we have the power to do that here at Colby.
Yeah, and thinking about students and, my student experience, like I remember there was one semester where I was taking a cinema studies and art history and a literature and a poetry class. And it just so happened that those classes all went to the museum at one point or other. So like all these different disciplines, I love hearing about how students, are at the center. But I hear you when you talk.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead, Jackie.
I was going to say that. Yeah. About when you were a student at Colby, and when you think about your time as a student at Colby, and then now in what you do you find yourself kind of going back in your mind about things that you learned here that now have different relevance than they did at the time?
Oh, absolutely. Like I think back to my experience at Colby Museum all the time. It's kind of what jump started in a way, like my interest in museums and arts and nonprofit spaces. But definitely being a student on campus, experiencing it in that way versus now working in the industry in nonprofits. Like I've learned a lot, having the experience here, but I was able to be an intern for the Colby Museum when I was a student. And so I kind of got a taste of what it was like to work in the museum spaces. So that kind of signaled to me like, okay, I'm interested in moving in that direction.
That's great.
Great. But I wanted to.
What you just mentioned, sorry, I keep interrupting you because things come to my mind as you're, what you just mentioned, I think is really critical to another piece, which is the way in which we have an opportunity to create pathways, because we're having young students that are undergraduates. We're focused on undergraduates. And how do we keep talking in the art museum field and so many fields about diversifying the field or creating entry points or whatever. But the reality is that part of it is, how do you create visibility for the opportunity early on? How do you allow people to experiment early on and figure out, before they've decided where they're gonna, that they're gonna be X, Y, and Z, how do you help young people see the possibilities for themselves? And so I think things like what you experience and internships are really crucial to the wide range of possibilities within the museum field. Because again, it's not just like being a curator or being an educator. It's like they're financial people that work in museum. There are all kinds of people. So I think that is very tied to part of what we're doing at Colby also, of like how do we create equitable entry points and really think about what does that kind of social justice piece looks like as we think about education.
Absolutely. And I'm thinking about, I know that for the Colby Museum, diversity, equity, access, inclusion are critical components of the museum's mission. And thinking about what kinds of roles and responsibilities the museum has in developing and diversifying opportunities for students and just in general at the museum. So I hear you when you're speaking about opportunities for students.
And one thing that I think we can do better as museums, and that I see a lot of opportunity in the coming years, because the field is changing and because the awareness around why these things, why does equity and racial justice need to become part of the practice, the lens that we bring to everything we do, not just at the museum, but in higher education in general. It's really fundamental to creating the conditions for students to learn. It's fundamental as students, the demographic of students is changing. It's fundamental to really understand the histories that have been difficult, that we haven't dealt with. And I think collectively, there's something to be said, not one by one, museum by museum, but collectively, and how to also network students to opportunities across the field. So if I have a great intern and they are graduating from their 4th year and they're going into the world, and I hear that there's a job at a different museum, how do we create those kind of connecting points, and how do we also connect students to each other so they themselves are a network of support? So those are things that I think that as a field, we need to understand how to create those entry points, how to create the network and the support and the sort of provide the system that really sustains students during their career. And I think we have Davis Connects here at Colby, which is amazing, precisely focus on these kind of student advancement. And then how do we continue to sustain that network and that sense of connection and possibility as people advance over time?
Yeah, I honestly think Colby has done a really good job, at least in arts field. I've been talking to students, and I'm impressed by Colby students, having initiative and just being genuinely curious and wanting to connect with people and other alum in working in the arts. So it's been really nice to get to know current students now, and I think some are watching. So it's look forward to staying in touch with them. There's so much exciting growth happening at the Colby Museum, obviously, through everything you've been describing, and also in downtown Waterville. I feel like we have to spend some time to talk about this. So the Arts Collaborative is scheduled to open this year, and also the Paul J. Schuff Arts Center in 2022. So I was wondering if you could please tell us more about how these spaces will be utilized by Colby students, but also the community at large. What kinds of programs will be happening there, exhibitions, performances, and what other arts education experiences?
I'm so excited about what is happening in Waterville, and it's part of the reason why this job was so attractive to me, because there's just so this notion that the mission of an academic institution can be completely interconnected to the desires, the hopes of a place. The place is Waterville, the place is Central Maine, in a very specific set of locations. And what's happening in Main Street is really an economic development approach that has the arts and humanities at the center. And Colby's a contributor, but it's not the only one. And so that's the other piece that I think is super exciting about what's happening downtown, is that everything that is happening there is a collaboration. And it's a collaboration, again, not just within Colby, but across different organizations that have been longstanding and that have great reputations, that have audiences in themselves, and that we all have the opportunity to do more. So what you're seeing on the screen is the Arts Collaborative that will open hopefully late spring. Everything in this pandemic is, but our plan is to open it in late spring. And what will be the first floor of the Arts Collaborative is really a public space. It's a space where literally the artistic practices, the research activities, the kind of convening, more behind the scenes things that will be happening on floors 2nd, 3rd, and 4th that are really going to house studios and research spaces for the Colby College's Lunder Institute for American Art. So in the first floor, one of the things that will happen is that there will be opportunities for those artists and researchers and practitioners that are working at the Arts Collaborative to really engage with different communities, different publics. But again, it's not just the Lunder Institute or the Colby College Museum of Art, it's also departments across Colby and entities across Colby and partners from across Waterville and partners even from across Maine, artists from different parts of Maine. So we really envision the first floor space, which is really kind of the coordination of that is overseen by the arts office here at Colby College, and my colleague Teresa McKinney is really leading kind of that oversight effort of how everything comes together. That space is going to be very much community space. So students are going to be part of it in that at times is going to be student-led performances and programming. Students at times are going to be collaborators. Students at times are going to be supporting behind the scenes. So there will be multiple roles. There will be presentations. There will be, we will have open studios. So people do have a chance to go upstairs sometimes and see what's going on. And I think the ethos of the entire Arts Collaborative is one of bringing together the kind of creative research and creative practice of artists and others together with the public. Like, how many people get to really go into an artist studio and see what's going on? It's not an experience that is often accessible. So how do you get to know the creative process firsthand? And how do you see kind of knowledge produced in time, so that's the Arts Collaborative. If we can have the next slide. This is the shop center that will open in 2023, again, if all goes according to plan. And I cannot express more just my excitement about what this space, it on the one hand brings together at an existing entity, which is the Waterville Opera House, which is to the far left of the image, or the far right of the image, and connects it to what is essentially it's an existing building that is getting adapted and upgraded as an art center that will also house Tectonic Arts. So it's a kind of art making space. It's also going to house a cinema house, the main film center is going to be housed there, and then also a gallery of the Colby College Museum of Art. So we will have the opportunity to also kind of bring exhibition programming literally to Main Street. And then there's also a whole lot of communal space for people to have a cup of coffee, for kids to play, to just hang out. So that's really going to have a huge impact as a very kind of open, porous, beautiful community space right at the heart. And then following that, in the following year, in 2023, so this is 2022, the following is 2023, is the Gordon Center for the Creative and Performing Arts. That won't be downtown, that will be on campus, but it really creates an incredible opportunity for Waterville to be truly a fantastic and much more expansive center for multidisciplinary performance, for really top, music in terms of various kinds of things that where maybe the opera house is way too big, but like some of the smaller spaces of the auditoria and things like that that are being created, and certainly where students are going to be learning, theater, dance, performance, all kinds of music in studios of that space. So it's, I think these three entities really change the landscape, again, not only for Colby, but certainly for Waterville and for Maine in general.
Just want to say that seeing those renderings makes me very excited and also a little bit jealous, but it just gives me an excuse to want to come back to Waterville to experience all of those new art spaces. And also, when I was a student, I was a big Railroad Square cinema goer. That's the independent film house in Waterville. So I was so excited to hear that the Main Film Center is coming to Main Street in Waterville. I also recently learned about a project that the Colby Museum is working on to reinterpret parts of their collection, including the museum's American West collection. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about that. Why is the museum trying to reinterpret their collections and re-examine their objects?
Yeah, and I will say that I think it is our responsibility. It is at the core of any art museum's mission, any institution that has a collection, to constantly interpret it and reinterpret it, because knowledge is not static. It's not like art history freezes in time and everything we needed to know about it, we knew about it in 1922. It's like, no, it changes because we as a society change, and what matters to us as a society and, as people changes. So it also what we are, we're growing our collection. So anytime we bring new works into the collection, they are in dialogue with things that were there before. And so that creates new kinds of conversations. It's like a party. 2 people are in the party, and then 5 more people show up, and you have just an opportunity for different kinds of conversations, different kinds of meeting each other. You have the opportunity to discover things that you wouldn't have imagined. And maybe from that, you actually change your life in some way. So similarly, I think objects are kind of in constant conversation with each other and with people. And so the need to reinterpret our collection is constant. I think what we are doing is really taking a focused view at our collection as a whole. And it's an ongoing process, but we want to kind of take a systemic approach so that we are really trying to understand what is there. Again, the collection has grown significantly over the last decade. And thanks to some hugely important gifts that really have transformed us. And so we want to understand what is there, what are the possibilities of it for the future, what are the stories that through the lens of today we might think about differently. In terms of the particularly the Southwest collection, we have an incredible collection of, for instance, Tao Society paintings. Thanks to Peter and Paul Lunder, that material is just spectacular. And we have sculptures, and we have really important works. And how do we put those works in conversation also with the work, for instance, that was taking place at times at the same time that those paintings were made by Indigenous people in that same geographic area? How do contemporary artists view and respond to these historical works? What are they making today in that part of the world? How do we bring the present and the past in dialogue with each other? And that, again, just expands, when we think about American West, what is even the American West? Where does it begin and end? And who decided that that was the American West? So it's sort of interrogating even the language that we use around these categories of art is at the heart of that project. And it's going to be a very collaborative project that draws, for instance, on our experience with the exhibition that we presented in 2019, Wiwanikan, which was really focused on Wabanaki art, and particularly contemporary Wabanaki art. And that process was very much a collaboration. Our curators were really facilitating, but not necessarily the ones, there was a curatorial team. It wasn't like the museum has all the answers and we are going to sort of say how it goes and what the stories are. Here, we actually want to surface the stories in collaboration with a really wide range of people that are involved with this place and also this history of art.
I'm loving all the questions that you're posing, and I feel like I'm receiving answers by just thinking about the questions. I love that. And I also love your metaphor of the party, which I have never thought of that in terms of museums permanent collections. Speaking of adding more people to the party, over the past few months, the Colby Museum has made many exciting gift of art announcements. You mentioned some already. There's the Jacob Lawrence print series, incredible, to the Ciara's family photography collection. Can you share more about these new party attendees and these additions to our collection? How will they be utilized by students and also for teaching, research, art making in general by the museum?
Thank you for asking about that. And actually, I think we have some slides so that people can see. If we can have the first slide. So this is one of 15 prints by the artist Jacob Lawrence. Some of you may have heard about this acquisition. I will say that that these acquisitions these new acquisitions, which are just a little handful of what has happened, are really the product of the long relationships, the commitment of really important supporters, in this case, Peter and Paul Lunder. They made this gift in honor of David, President Green, and Carolyn Green, and other donors, as you'll see. But it's also Sharon Corwin, my predecessor, who really cultivated these opportunities, sought them out, and I really want to give huge credit to Sharon because she just did an astounding job building the collection, and right now I'm kind of the beneficiary of that. So this is a recent acquisition. It's 15 silk screens that Jacob Lawrence, hugely important American artist, created late in his life, but based on the first narrative series that he made when he was 21 years old. So he was the age of Colby college students when he made this. And he made 41 paintings at that time to really chronicle a history that wasn't really known in this country of the life of the revolutionary hero Toussaint Louverture, a Haitian revolutionary hero. And so he selected 15 towards the end of his life to recreate in terms of and really reinterpret through the medium of printmaking. If we can have the next slide. I think my sense of time is a little turned upside down, as I'm sure many people's is, but this is actually the image that is on the cover of the book, marking the gift from Bill and Nancy Ciara's of the Ciara's family photography collection, which is approximately 500 photographs, really wide ranging in terms of artists, modes of expression, and this is just such a beautiful, beautiful piece by Ralph Eugene Meatyard. And it's one of the ways in which I think our supporters have really transformed the museum. Just a little bit over 2 decades ago, the museum didn't have a strong photography collection. And Bill, who was then a governor, really saw an opportunity and a need to really address that area. And so gradually built this collection, and eventually this now is part of the collection of the museum, these works, and will really change, again, going back to the metaphor of the party, I mean, it really changes what is possible, not only for the photography curriculum, but really across campus. Photography is one of the areas that is now most requested by faculty across campus. And if we can have the next slide. This is a really fantastic piece that we also received as a wonderful gift in honor of Sharon last fall. And it's another way, now that we are committed to this area of photography, we're growing it in different ways. And so this is one example of how that grows. And then one more example, one more slide. This is not photography, but another example of our collection really benefiting from some of these recent gifts. This is a gift from the Alex Katz Foundation, they have been so generous. And this is a fantastic, I just absolutely love this sculpture. It will be on view for a while. So I hope that our broader public, not just Colby, can see it firsthand sometime in this coming year. By Tadeusz Mosley, a self-taught sculptor. This is made in walnut and it's hand carved and it's just incredible, and is now featured. We are presenting it currently in the Adams Gallery, which is our lobby space, in dialogue with other works that are kind of in some way riffing off on the idea of treeness. But we will be continued to show it in relation to other narratives and other works. We have a really important exhibition coming up in the fall of the work by the artist Bob Thompson. And there's some really interesting connections in terms of this form and some of the forms in Bob Thompson's paintings. So I'm super excited and grateful for all of these gifts.
Thank you so much for walking us through those works. That was such a treat to hear from you, Jackie. But we have to also talk about the Lunder Institute, because we're not just bringing in new works. It's like we're bringing, the museum brings scholars, artists, programmers, all people from all over the country, from all over the world, really, to the museum to engage with these works, to engage with students. The Lunder Institute for American Art is an integral part of the Colby Museum. It's an incubator for various kinds of research and artistic curatorial approaches. What do you see as the broader public value of the Lunder Institute's work specifically? And also how might, I'm thinking about the new spaces in downtown, how might the Arts Collaborative building support the aims of the Lunder Institute?
Those are hugely important questions, and they are very, very active on our minds, because the Lunder Institute in many ways is growing and transforming, because all of a sudden we are going from a program that has been largely based on a non kind of place-based model to go to a place-based model. There's a building, there's spaces, there's an opportunity to physically be in the space together, and there are some things that are possible with that would not be possible otherwise. I would say that one of the really important things that the Lunder Institute does is to really facilitate experimentation among practitioners, scholars, artists, various people that really help us think differently about collections at the museum. So for instance, for that Southwest project, we have a group of scholars who we had designed that program for this year to make sure, and had selected those fellows so that they would help us with the research that needs to happen in relation to that public exhibition that will happen next year from our collection. So they are really delving and helping us think much beyond what we could have on our own. And so that's a very, immediately it manifests into an exhibition, immediately it manifests into new ways of thinking about art from this region. It manifests in educational programs for K through 12, because how do we teach about the art of the Southwest, and how does that serve as a model elsewhere? So it really, that notion of, and of course it changes how we teach and learn here at Colby. So how does research, community engagement, artistic practice, again, come together to really think differently about things that maybe we take for granted, that they are what they are, or these histories are what they are. And then translating that through the relationships and all the platforms that we have at the Colby Museum and at Colby into teaching and learning for many, many different people. So I see the Lunder Institute as a kind of, I've used the metaphor of a gland. It's like that entity inside the body that has, it might be very specific and small, but has a lot of different implications for the rest of the system. So that is one example. I think another piece that is really critical is how do we sort of structure relationships, and how do we structure collaboration so that, again, we move away from the idea that academic institutions such as the Colby, Colby or the Colby Museum have all the knowledge. So that's where, and what kinds of knowledge shape things. So how we structure collaboration, which is hugely important to the Arts Collaborative and to the Lunder Institute, and bring those people together is really important. So we're creating models for the field. And then finally, I think it's about the Arts Collaborative by offering a place, really as an invitation to artists and researchers to think about what does their practice look in a location, and again, in relation to community, and not simply kind of, artists and scholars are not really ever in isolation, but there's an idea that is how that work happens. So really it creates an opportunity to engage with the very specific conditions of Waterville and the people who are here in Waterville, and to really create new work as a result of it. So I think that's part of the public value that it brings, and what the Arts Collaborative can do for the mission.
being that you're an educator, I'm thinking that you know dozens of ways to measure success because, you know, in museum education departments, it's all about program evaluations and data and the metrics of your school group visits. But I was wondering if you could share a little or highlight some of your hopes for the Colby Museum that might be less traditional than visitation numbers. You know, what are your dreams for the Colby Museum?
You mentioned questions before, and for me, I think the question of metrics are a matter of kind of translate into questions as well. So a fundamental question for me is, what is the difference that we're making in people's lives? So if we are working with Colby students as part of classes, how are we contributing to them understanding that discipline, that set of materials, that set of questions that are being posed through the class through a new lens? How do we introduce students to art by virtue of coming from, say, a science and technology class, and maybe they never thought they were interested in art, and now they're at the art museum? And so how do these, you know, so impact for me, for instance, is what is the difference that we're making in terms of knowledge, attitude, behavior that really changes how people see themselves and see their world? It's very hard to measure that, but there are ways in which non-quantitative ways of measuring that, and then some ways of translating that into quantitative. I think another one has to do with how does our collection change? So a measure of impact is, what do we consider valuable? What are we bringing into the collection? What are we attracting into the collection? And therefore, what is the material that we have available to, again, foster that teaching and learning that we are all about? Another component is our networks. Who are we in dialogue with? Who are we in collaboration with? Are we in collaboration or in dialogue with anybody? If we're not, that is a negative metric. If we are in collaboration and genuine, authentic dialogue with a wide range of entities that see relevance in what we do as well, and where we're kind of contributing to shared goals, that is success. And then also, how at the community level, how are we contributing to realize the desires of not just, say, Colby or the Colby Museum, but of a larger community? So what are those needs and desires? And then how do we contribute to that in addition to others? So those are examples of what I consider success, you know, is that difference that we're making at the individual and the collective level.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Jackie. And I very much enjoyed hearing all the questions posed and also your metaphors. It's been very poetic. I did the poetry creative writing concentration when I was an English major at Colby.
Oh,
so I see you with the metaphors.
I love
so we have,
by the way.
I agreed. Poetry is great. We have questions from our audience, and Tim is asking, what does the museum plan to do to enhance enjoyment of art virtually?
Oh, what a great question. Funny that you asked that question today, because we were just talking with somebody who has a long career in media and in public media in particular. And the reason why we were talking to her was because we realized that we have an opportunity to really treat the medium of virtual as a truly creative platform. And we want to skill up in how to really use that medium to truly engage people, you know, to make sure that these formats are all they can be, to really maximize the creative opportunities that Zoom or whatever it is that we're using provides. How do we sort of pace something that happens virtually? What are the opportunities for people to interact with each other and participate? So we're really kind of thinking about how do we take the virtual work that we've started doing to a new level. And similarly, for instance, we are we're going to be bringing equipment to actually allow us to do some virtual tours that then can be available, where students, K-12 students, can participate live, and certainly other audiences as well. So we're going to experiment with that. We've been learning from other museums, and we're going to be bringing that so that we can, you know, it may be another year, or at least who knows how long that kids can come to the museum. So how do we change that up? So those are just some examples. So it's very present in our minds.
Thank you for sharing about that. I think we have time for one more from DeSandro. What advice would you give a first-year Colby student who would like to be a top-tier museum director someday? That's a good one.
Oh, fabulous question. I say pursue your passions, pursue your interests. So continue that inquiry of like, what do I care about? Develop your sense of self-reflection. Learn to write really well. Because you're going to be using writing and you're going to be using speaking. Those communication skills are crucial. Interpersonal skills are crucial. And then really find any opportunity, any means, community opportunities, sports opportunities, arts opportunities to develop your leadership skills. So what kind of leader are you, and kind of being reflective about that. And so that I would say those are some of the ways in which you can start thinking about it. And then let's have a conversation too. I'd be super happy to talk with you.
So if you heard that, you should definitely reach out to Jackie, send her an email so that you guys can connect over a virtual coffee. Awesome. Thank you for that question. I think, let's see, I'm cognizant of our time. I think we should, do we have time for one more? Let's see.
I think we have a couple more minutes.
Okay. Here's a question for the audience. What kinds of exhibitions or programs will be planned for the downtown art spaces? So if you have any insider knowledge about what's coming up.
It's a very active process of development right now. So for the shop center, we are looking at kind of directionally about types of things we might do. So something we're exploring is, might there be a kind of research development public workshopping phase that happens at the Arts Collaborative that then has a public manifestation in the downtown space of the Shop Art Center in the gallery. We're also thinking about kind of thematics, that kind of themes and ideas. For instance, questions of the environment are hugely important to all of us, and in particular here in Maine. So, we're kind of in the place of exploring types of ideas, approaches for the Arts Collaborative. What we envision is a series of formats. Some of them are conversations that, will find a public life in different ways. Some of them are, the idea, and this again is very much in collaboration with the Arts Office and others at Colby, of kind of takeovers. What happens when an entity or a collaborative or a department or a group of students takes over that first floor space and really sort of develops programming over the course of a week or a month for different communities and different audiences. So that's another kind of approach. Again, the environmental thread is really important. So we're exploring opportunities to make that part of the programming of the Arts Collaborative. So there, and then as I mentioned, kind of open studios, we will definitely have some of that, some of those experiences at different points of the year. So that's some of what's to come. And part of what we want to do is be responsive and nimble and make sure that we are not just coming up with all the answers, but that we're listening to what people want and what people are interested in, what students are interested in, what community partners are interested in, and really using that space to its maximum.
Awesome. Thank you for answering that one. I think we'll start our close then. But Jackie, this has been so awesome to talk to you and download your information and introduce you, of course, to all the folks who are tuning in tonight. And also, Jackie, I'm looking forward to finally meeting you in person one day soon, hopefully, in Maine.
Julia, it has been such a joy to talk with you. Thank you for your amazing questions, for your great energy. And it's funny that you say that because I feel that we have, but of course we have not met in person. But I just sort of feel I have this connection that, I think we've gotten used to this medium sometimes, but it will be so thrilling to meet you in person as well. And to meet so many of you who are in the audience when you finally when I'm able to travel and when you're finally able to come to Maine. I can't wait to really, really open our doors wide.
Awesome.
So thank you all for joining us.
Yeah, and so again, thank you for watching and also for participating in the museum's virtual programs over the past year. The Colby Museum is only fully realized with your participation. The Colby Museum belongs to you guys. So to learn more about the museum's exhibitions and programs, you can, and also to support us in the museum's work, please visit colby.edu/museum/support. Thank you all again, and have a good night.
Thank you.